it's really, it's a real interesting situation, I think, to be, to have highlighted the wood fire part of what we both do, because it has been a significant part of my entire ceramic career. And it hasn't been all of it, but it's been a significant part of it. And there's something that has influenced what I make and the way I look at things that is manifested, I think, not just in the wood fire pots, but in the other pots as well. And I somehow think that that's significant.
I feel like what John has said here hits the nail on the head as far as looking at materials that we use and permanence and how we play with what we come up with as a final result. It's taken, you know, a long time to get to certain surfaces and getting those forms to work with the surfaces, and then playing with the idea, using the word playing as an idea. You know, how do we play with the materials that we work with and keep it sort of innovative, and at the same time we're showing you our successes here when, you know, somebody knows or whoever knows there's lots of failures that take place in the meantime. So there's lots of experimenting that goes along with it. And so to me, the whole process of working with this malleable material that becomes really hard and permanent becomes really important, that you want to have a good piece in the end. Otherwise, we have to give them the hammer. The time is really, it's important. I used to think, you know, when we sit down to make work, or when I sit down to make work, I think about the idea of going into a storage space after my pieces are made and saying, I'd like to pick out this pot and that pot. And, you know, that doesn't happen.
I've been making teapots ever since I came back to the United States in 1984. I mean, I made them in Japan too, but and that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, sort of. If you keep doing this kind of thing, then people want those kinds of things, and so there's kind of demand there. I am also motivated or intrigued by food and food display, food service, that sort of thing. And so the things that the immediate needs for the table at home kind of drive various kinds of short explorations as well. There are lots of things in this world that are better because they take time. Music is the perfect example. It's not better because you play it faster.
I take pictures as I load, and I take pictures when I unload the kiln. And I've heard it said before that loading is firing. The sort of surfaces that you achieve, like you think about what's the front of the pot, what's the back of the pot. You know, it's a three-dimensional object. It's like a human being at some level. You know, where's the front and the back? And so I think about those elements when I load pieces in the kiln. And so how close they are together or how far they are apart will determine those little subtle variations in the pieces. And so I think about those elements as well. And so at some level, that yes, they are masked off. I've taken pieces before and I've laid them down on their sides, and while the clay was soft and plastic, I drew a pattern on the piece, and then when I loaded it into the kiln, I laid it on its side and was able to almost mimic that surface. So there's an idea that I've been able to figure out, you know, like, okay, I'm going to mask this off and provide a specific surface. So at that level, I think when people say, oh, you're putting the pieces in the kiln and you're giving it up to the firing gods or whatever, I think there's a lot more to it, a lot more investigation that can be accomplished if you're paying attention. And so looking at specific things in the way you place the pieces in the kiln, you know, like I've had problems with like that teapot up there as an example, I try to make those really quick. They're like drawings or sketches, and I try to make them fairly quick, in 15 minutes or so, versus the other teapots that I make, which could take me an entire day to make one. Those things, you know, if I load them into the kiln incorrectly, the spouts can go completely wild and flop over on all sorts of other things. So that's something that we learn as we're experiencing the process.
Yeah, there's a funny mix between control and discovery. You know, there's a certain measure of control or a certain attempt to control things, but there's also, you know, a certain amount of serendipity, and I think that it is. It's not. Well, I said it earlier. It's like fishing. I mean, if you don't bait the hook and throw it in, you're not going to get anything. So you've got, I mean, chance favors the prepared mind or something like that. It's finding a balance between those things, and it's part of the pleasure of it, of course, is the discovery part of it. You do things that you didn't plan.
When I think about making pots, you know, there are the three things I think about, like, you know, a lot of these guys here are just starting off, and then there are graduate students, and you have to synchronize, and I hate to use that word, but you got to have your head, your heart, and your soul, and your hands together in order to grow. And I haven't finished asking all the questions that I have at this point. Had I answered all the questions that I was working on, maybe I would move on to something else. But I feel like there's a lifetime of questioning here. So it's more about the questions than about the answers. Sometimes the answers provide more questions. You know, and that has to do with the concept behind making the pieces. And there's a whole bunch of other things involved with the idea behind making the pieces we talked about. John was talking about, like, the idea of food and presentation and that sort of thing as well. Those are really important things to consider as you're working. Why are we making these things? What's the important part there? Not just going through the motions. When I sit down to make a bunch of cups, you know, I have these questions, or teapots. I'm trying to make something that express an idea about self or whatever. I want them to come across like my pots, not somebody else's